I'm one of those that never had that conversation, never came out to their dad. Why I never told my dad that I was gay, why I never came out to my dad. And it really goes back a long ways. Of course, when you're a kid and you first learn that, you're hiding this from everyone. I had my first relationship at 19, and the uh, other fellow, my boyfriend, was 9 years older than me. I was 19. He was 28. Is that right? Yeah. So I thought I was on top of the world. And I don't know if I would have been able to tell my family at that time, but a big thing happened during that relationship. AIDS first came on the scene, and no one knew what it was. It wasn't even called that to begin with, I don't think. And so then that was like a very scary time. And I didn't want at that time to tell my parents that not only am I gay, there's this disease out there spreading around with gay men especially, other communities too, but no one even knows what's going on. So that was a scary thing that I didn't want to put my parents through either. I didn't know what was going on. So that was one aspect of it. And then I used other reasons or excuses, whatever you want to call them, for quite a long time. I would, if I'm in a relationship, I would just about to be ready to think I'm going to tell, my folks about the relationship, and then the relationship would fall apart. I really wanted to have the ability to say, Mom, Dad, I'm in a relationship. It's solid. You don't have to worry about those other things as far as diseases out there. I'm in a solid relationship. Since those, fell through quite a bit, that didn't happen. So I ended up, I guess, on this, I call it a serial monogamy track, kind of. I wasn't perfect in that. And eventually I had the discussion with my mom. I was really pushed to do so by my partner, my significant other at that time. He felt that I was ashamed of the relationship, ashamed of him, and he threatened either, I can't even remember if it was to not be in the relationship or that he was going to tell. I don't remember. It was just something that was very disturbing. So I was pressured and did tell my mom on the time when she visited us, and that was very difficult. I did that the last day of the visit, put it off as long as possible. I could go into that whole story another time. But Mom was the only person that I told in my family. Until the next person that I told in my family was my youngest brother. He moved out with me to live there with us. We were living in Bozeman at the time. And my then still partner, but more business partner at that time, said, you've got to tell your brother. I mean, what if he doesn't know? When he gets out here, he's obviously, going to know things. And so I thought, well, I think he knows. But anyway, on the trip across country, I got into this conversation with my brother and told him a story, and then he was laughing, and I said, well, when did you know that I was gay? He says, I've always known you were gay. All my friends knew you were my big gay brother. And I'm like, what? I thought I was hiding. And so we had great conversations and found out he had known all his life that I was gay. And I then didn't have a conversation really with anyone in the family. A cousin that ended up asking me a question in a roundabout way of, about one of my, well, actually, it was my partner before, Dylan. And she asked me, what was he like? She would like to meet him. She says, well, darn, because she had a friend that if I wasn't in a relationship, she would really like me to meet. So she was obviously telling me. So it's like, obviously people in my family knew. Then the big event was when Dylan and I finally got married, and I called my mom to let her know, and I'd actually tried to call my dad and let him know that Dylan and I got married, because he knew us. My dad had visited us and saw that we had one bedroom in our space. So I thought, he's got to know, right? He's got to know. So having the conversation with my mom, I said, when I was going to call Dad back, she says, well, I'm not so certain that that's the best thing to do. She says, I just don't know if this is something that's your dad even thinks about. she had no idea, what he thought about things. She just didn't think it was in his realm. Just anything he thought about. Like, really? So I didn't call, and then my brothers, called, said congratulations in order, what have you. But all of my brothers thought that it's probably best not to tell my dad, which I was really surprised about because I just figured my dad knew. I had never broached the conversation with him. It seemed obvious to me, and I was going to be comfortable having the conversation and look forward to having the conversation, but I wanted to be more on my dad's terms rather than to kind of get it off my chest or make me feel better that I'd had the conversation. I wanted to make sure that it was the right time for my dad, and was just hoping, that little different things that were said or done, that he would bring it up and broach the topic, and he never did. Now, during those last days that we were there visiting Dad as he was in decline and in the hospital nursing home, he had some conversations with Dylan that really made Dylan question too. So what's he trying to say? Is he trying to say this? But he wouldn't say anything to me. So we didn't know, and then my dad ended up passing, and we never had the conversation. It's something, I would have loved to have had, but I wanted to be on his terms, and maybe he was doing exactly the same thing if he knew. Maybe he was giving me the opportunity for it to be on my terms. I guess I'll know in this lifetime. He died without me ever having that deep conversation with him. Maybe if we had had more years, I think if I had moved back sooner, if Dylan and I had been here closer and been able to be going home back and forth more with only a 10-hour drive instead of a 32-hour drive, I think we would have gotten around to having the conversation. I think it would have finally have come up. But during that whole time, I also never said anything to my stepmom, which I was pretty certain that she knew and understood. But I also didn't want to have that conversation with her, not knowing how they lived their lives, what their agreements were between each other, what they shared and didn't share. So I didn't want to put the situation on her to have spoken with her and then her be the one to keep the secret or hold the discussion. I never put her in that situation. I didn't want to put it on her to hold that. But about a month ago, I guess, after my dad passed in November, I finally, it was our last trip to Alabama. I finally got the chance to speak with my stepmom and ask her if Dad ever knew. And she says, well, I don't know. She says, I gave him several opportunities to have the conversation. She would bring up things to my dad and about other people she knew that were gay without giving anything away, and other relationships, and just have the conversation, thinking that would open the door for Dad, that if he wanted to have the conversation, she would give him the opportunity to broach the topic. And she said he never did. He never took the bait, I guess. So she didn't ever know if he totally understood my and Dylan's relationship, or if it just really, really was not part of what he thought about. I hardly can imagine that it wasn't something that was in his wheelhouse and that he thought of, because growing up, there were people that my dad would say, something about, well, he's a little bit light in his loafers, that little thing. Which I knew exactly what he was saying, even though he didn't use the word gay. And he ended up mentioning one of the doctors and his husband. And I thought, oh gosh, he would have a problem with that. But turns out that doctor, who had a relationship with another guy, I don't know if they were ever legally married. I don't know if that was like during the time of legal marriage. But he referred to that doctor as him and his, I don't know if he said husband, I can't remember, or if his man friend, whatever it was. But I think he used the word husband. They had a big brick house together. But that was the doctor that if Dad had anything happen to him, take him to him. He didn't want to go to the other doctors. He wanted to go to that doctor who he obviously knew was gay. So I knew my dad wasn't homophobic to the core, in that sense. I just don't know exactly how my dad thought about things. I look forward. I hope if I'm right, and the life works the way it is, life and death, that I ultimately know how he thought and what his impression would have been. Because after we got married, Dylan and I, my call was going to be to let him know that, Dad, I think but, with everything going on, especially with COVID, we just went ahead and sped this up. We were going to wait for a beach somewhere, but so no one was invited. But if we had been able to invite folks, I would have wanted him to be my best man if we'd had that kind of a wedding. Now, whether that would have happened or not, whether that would have been in his wheelhouse, I can't say. Never had the conversation. I know he liked Dylan. Never talked to him without him asking about old Dylan. And he and Dylan had some very, very good times and conversations there that last month when we were staying with him in the hospital and the nursing facility. And he had some deep conversations, it turned out, that conversations that my dad and I never even had. So I'm glad for that. I just know that he loved me. He always told me he loved me. And I always told him I loved him. And he was very close to Dylan. Dylan said, he felt like Dad was his friend. He was, irrespective of Dylan and my relationship, Dad was a guy that Dylan really clicked with. Dad clicked with him. So, had a good life, but I'm one of those that never had that conversation, never came out to their dad. For it to be good, bad, indifferent, I don't know. That's just how it is. It's how it ended up. If my dad had lived longer, I'm sure we would have had the conversation. We would have had more opportunities to have, close times together, and it would have happened. But he departed this life, and I never had that conversation with him. So that's the way it is. It'll be a long time.